We're about to enter into a lot of fun, and one great thing after lunch, we thought to keep everybody awake, we'd talk about sex and safety. So this should keep us awake, but I know what's going to keep us awake is our next speaker, and that's Dr. John Ball. I'd like to get a show of hands. How many folks here have never heard John Ball? That's a few. So I'm just telling you, you guys are really in for a treat. This guy's amazing. And I got to tell you, I come from the tree production side. He even knows stuff about tree production, which is really great. He was out at the farm, I want to say about 6-7 years ago, and just shared a whole bunch of really great stuff with us. But I get to introduce Dr. John Ball. And for those of you that don't know, I just get to read his bio here, is a tree care industry's leading safety expert. No, I didn't say sex expert, this is safety expert. He's a professor of forestry at South Dakota State University, where he instructs courses in arboriculture, forestry, emergency technical training. He also is an EMT, which really brings a lot of the visceral side of the safety thing that he's going to bring in a second talk. I'm not sure he's going to be coming to us virtually. So this is like one of the first times we've done this. So bear with us. I think you guys are going to just get your socks rocked off. No pressure, John. But let's just get going. Can you welcome him with an applause? Thank you.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a good lunch. I've been there numerous times, just like Linda, your morning speaker, and the food's always great. The whole conference is fantastic, and it's always great to chat with you folks. So I'm sorry I'm not able to do that today, and I'm sitting here in my office between classes and able to do these presentations for you. Well, the first talk I've titled Sex in the Straight Tree. Now, that is kind of a catchy title, and I will admit this is Y rated, so don't panic there for those also watching at home if you have the kiddos walking through. But the reason for this talk was from my frustration of planting trees on campus that were supposed to be seedless and then have people complaining about the seeds. And it was like, well, what's going on? We planted this so we wouldn't have seeds. And so this presentation covers really the sex life of trees and then all the different ways our seedless trees end up producing seeds. So I'm hoping by the end of it, if you've suffered the same problems, that a tree you bought that was not supposed to produce any fruit or seed suddenly does, you'll understand why that occurred. And more importantly, how you can avoid having that happen again. So we'll kick this off here. We all like trees. I mean, that's why you're here today. It's not like this is a room filled with people that says, I hate trees, tell me how I can get rid of them. That's a right-away conference, and I speak at those too. But no, we like trees, but we're kind of picky what we like. When we look at what we really like about trees, here's the big three. And this really hasn't changed in decades. I mean, it makes sense. They want one that looks nice. That's why we call them ornamental trees. They want ones that have beautiful shade. I mean, just you can sit underneath and it's nice and cool. And they want trees that mark the seasons. I mean, when people come to a garden center, and I managed garden centers for years, what was everybody looking for? A nice looking tree. They also wanted something that's going to have shade in your yard and maybe something that has fall color if they can get it. So, I mean, look at this tree, this monkey pod tree. I took this picture over in Honolulu. I wish I could grow this in South Dakota. I mean, one tree, huge, stretching forever. What a climbing tree. But, you just look at this tree, it's gorgeous. And then we all like shade. You have hot summers, we have hot summers. Sitting beneath the shade of a cottonwood, even, or an aspen, or you pick the tree, it just feels so much better than sitting out in that hot, dry sun. And then, yes, we do like the fall colors. Admittedly, we tend to go more for the yellows than the reds just because we don't have a lot of trees that have excellent red fall color. We do, but the list is rather small compared to the trees that have the yellow, the pumpkin, and that. But nevertheless, one of the things we always look forward to is that fall color change. Well, there's things we don't like about trees too, things that we just soon they not do. And when we look at their annoyances, here's the big three. They don't like falling leaves. Now, I don't know what we do about that. Develop a tree that sucks in the leaves in the fall like a big Hoover. We're pretty much going to have to play that hand. I mean, we're going to have fallen leaves. They don't like surface roots, and tell me who does. They're a trip hazard. They get in your lawn, and there's a lot of reasons why we get surface roots, not necessarily related to the tree, but how it's being grown. But the big thing I'm going to focus on is fruit or seed pods. When I worked in garden centers, there were two things that could kill a sale. Everybody comes in and asks, how fast does it grow? Whatever tree they're looking at, how fast does it grow? What they're looking for is something to grow 50 feet a minute. They want to put it in the yard, have it immediately expand to its total height, and then it's done. And of course, they don't like it when you say, well, it's a slow growing tree. Slow growing tree to them is no, not going to buy. And the other one is they don't want to buy anything with messy fruit. Now, I've learned the definition of messy fruit is any fruit. They don't want to see fruit on their trees, other than obviously their fruit trees, but they don't like that. I mean, leaves, yeah, that's an annoyance. I don't know about you folks, but believe it or not, I get calls from people in the fall in my extension office saying, well, can I make the neighbor rake up all the leaves in my yard that came from his trees? No, sorry, you're out of luck on that one. Leaves drop or leaves drop, and you're all responsible for your own yard. But yeah, it's a major annoyance to a lot of people. Surface roots, yes, absolutely. But as Linda could discuss at lengths, the reason we have surface roots don't necessarily have anything to do with the species of tree that you purchased. It's the growing environment it finds itself in. But then the fruit or seeds. I mean, even acorns. They're like marbles on the sidewalk. And people don't like that. It's kind of a trip hazard and that, and messy fruit and all this sort of stuff. So when you look at this, falling fruit was considered an annoyance for street trees. Absolutely for street trees. Nobody wants to have street trees that produce any fruit. Honey locust pods. When was the last time you had someone said, boy, I wish more honey locust pods fell from that tree? Something else I could pick up, spend half my day on. No, it does not happen. So, because of that, we do not want trees that produce fruit. And because of that, we have this term, botanic sexism. We want guys, only guys. We do not want any gals in the urban forest. All right. Because if we have guys, we're not going to have fruit. Now, trees are a little bit complicated in their sex life. So it doesn't work out this simple. But truly, this is it. They do not want to see fruit at all. Now, this botanic sexism has been carried through in looking at a number of different things here. And again, we do not want pods on our coffee trees. Okay. We do not want samaras falling on our maple trees or our ash trees in the days before emerald ash borer and such. And with the exception of some crab apples and a few other trees to which we find the fruit ornamental, we'd like to just avoid fruit, which means instead we're going to plant trees that produce a lot of pollen. All right. Or, we get these that produce seeds. And we do have trees that are called seedless. And I'm just showing you a brief list. It could go on forever with the number of varieties, and they're always coming up with more and more trees that are seedless. But, here are a number, but many of these trees you can find seed on them. Okay. Well, what happened? That's what we're going to talk about here. But let's just start out with this. Just planting guy trees, trees that will not produce fruit, can be a problem. And one of the things we think about is just their annoyance. Green ash, for example, all those little ash flower gall mites have gone through and made all these little galls. They don't hurt the tree at all. They're just affecting the staminate flowers, what we often call the male flowers. It's kind of like a cheap vasectomy for an ash tree. So it doesn't really hurt them, but it doesn't look nice. And pollen. That's the part we really forgot. You plant a lot of trees out there that all they're doing is producing pollen. You can increase pollen counts. Now, we often blame trees like pines for pollen, and most of the time we shouldn't. Their pollen's a little too big. It's going to stick in your nose. You're not sneezing because of the pine tree. You're sneezing because something else is producing pollen at the same time of the pine tree. We get this all the time in the Black Hills. The ponderosa pine, well, I'm allergic to them. You're not. That's a pretty big pollen grain. It's going to stick. So you're not worried about that. But something else is blooming at the same time. Now, we do have some, though, that can be a problem. Junipers, for example, cedars, some species more than others. And of course, on this one, on this Rocky Mountain juniper, it's just starting to produce the male cones, as we call them. They're not true flowers, but nevertheless, they're producing pollen. That pollen can be extremely fine and can be an allergen for many people. And we even have lists of that. If you're using iGrow, the tree inventory software, they've now put this plant allergy scale on it. Now, this scale does have a lot of limitations. This is where Linda would mention them. That, hey, take a look at it because you have to look at what data was used to build this. And the data isn't quite as good as you might like, but nevertheless can give you kind of a guide as to which trees really produce a lot of pollen. And if you take a look, it's not the pistillate flowers that accept the pollen. It's the staminate flowers that produce the pollen that are really our highest risk for allergies. And the junipers, the mulberries, silver maples even are all rated fairly high. And for the most part, these are wind pollinated trees. I mean, that's a simple thing to look at. If the wind is carrying your pollen, it's going to be fairly light and it can be so small that it can be an allergen. So silver maple's one. Now, it's not a major one anywhere. And by the way, I like planting these for their flowers. If you're someone that's trying to make a bee friendly garden, the pollen and nectar is pretty valuable to bees. Silver maples aren't stupid. They depend on wind pollination, but they got a backup. They're going to make their flowers, which do not have petals, attractive enough that you are going to attract pollinators early spring. And the pollinators get a bonus for coming there and getting some valuable resources that are fairly difficult to acquire at that time. Now, mulberry, no, nobody likes them. They do produce a lot of very fine pollen, and we do have people that are quite allergic to mulberry trees. Not so much with elms, but again, another example of a wind pollinated tree, because the wind pollinated trees are the ones that we have the greatest problems with allergies. Insect pollinated trees produce pollen that is usually not going to be an allergen. It's pretty big, it's sticky, it's designed to be carried, not inhaled. Now, you will get some people to say, well, no, 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 no. I'm allergic to lilacs. Well, you're not. Not to the pollen of the lilac. Interesting enough, there are people who have an allergy to a fragrance. And so merely smelling the lilac, the scent of the lilac, can actually cause reaction in some people. But it's not that they're inhaling the pollen. I know it means the same thing for someone. Either way, they sneeze. But in this case, it is not the pollen that's the problem. It's the fragrance that's the problem. Well, that means we ought to look at flowers for a minute. If you look at flowers, they do contain these basic parts. They're going to have petals, not all of them, but many of them, of course, particularly the ones that are insect pollinated. They're going to have stamens, which are what we call the male part. They're the ones that produce the pollen, and then the pistil, which receives the pollen. We often refer to that as the female part of the plant. Now, again, these are generally going to be insect pollinated. Bees are a lot of cases going for these, and so we have a lot of flowers that make themselves attractive to pollinators. Now, it depends on who's pollinating them. If you ever go up to a hawthorn tree and just try to inhale that open flower, some of them can make you gag. They smell like rotted meat. They're designed to smell like rotted meat. Have you ever looked who pollinates a lot of these hawthorns? Hoverflies. And you'll see them buzzing back and forth, and they're after the flowers. But what's attracting a flower is they smell rather bad. And so, even though they're a flowering plant and they attract a pollinator, it's not necessarily trying to attract the bees and that we think of with the nice fragrant flowers to them. And then we have some really old plants out there. Magnolias, they produce tepals. That's petals and sepals that really don't have a clear difference. And they've been around a long time. For those you remember this picture, almost every kid had this in their dinosaur book when they were 5 years old, The Age of the Reptile. And despite the fact every dinosaur you see here lived in an entirely different time period, we were all just, oh my gosh, look at these big critters. Well, what you're going to see in all the pictures is a magnolia because they're a really old plant. And at that point, they hadn't separated petals and sepals yet. Now, you might say, okay, John, but why is that important to know? Do you know that they even predated bees in terms of being pollinated? That's what beetles did. Think of that. They didn't have bees when they started out. So they really designed their flowers more for beetles than bees. Having said that, you will find bees come to them in that, but you might also notice there's some insecticides that bees are very sensitive, but they're still labeled for magnolias. Why? Because they're not bee pollinated. I wouldn't carry it that far, to be honest with you. But what you'll typically find more are beetles. Actually, click beetles will feed on these. They're after the protein. And beetles don't just kind of delicately grab it. They shred these flowers to do it. So when I get a call from a landscape architect that says, "Well, I want to plant a lot of magnolias in our pollinator garden." Well, that's a good idea. Who are you trying to attract? If it's beetles, you got it. And there's a good value in doing that. But this is not your go-to plant for trying to collect our typical pollinators we think of, most of our hymenoptera, our bees. Well, let's build a flower right here. We have sepals, which protect it. Okay, and if we're five meris, five parts, there's five. And then we have, in this case, five petals, which are the attractive part of the flower and helps encourage and attract and direct the pollinators. But then we also have stamens. Stamens are the male portion and they are producing the pollen. And there are going to be a lot of them in many cases, 15 to 30. And of course, then you're going to have the pistil. One, there can be several. And we have this flower, it has all the parts. It has the staminate part of it, it has the pistillate part of it. So essentially, it could pollinate itself. And some have that capability. And if you look, here's all the plants we have that have what we call a co-sexual. Used to be called bisexual because they have stamens and pistils. Now, by the way, they may pollinate themselves, but also they have mechanisms to prevent self-pollination. And so not every plant here will pollinate itself. We'll go over them here in a minute, but what you're seeing there is a nice picture of a tulip poplar. And if you look at that flower, which is a fairly old flower in terms of evolutionary time, they've got this cone in the center for the pistil. They have the 6 petals and about 20 to 50 stamens that are producing the pollen that's going to be released. And then take a look at basswoods. They have numerous stamens on it, but they also have these nectaria, these little glands at the base of the petiole and stamens that the bees just love. I mean, if you've ever looked at a basswood tree or a linden tree, it can almost vibrate with the number of bees that are attracted to it. And it's not just the pollen that they're getting the nectar as well. And that brings us to cherries. Boy, you can get a lot of bees after cherries, but not all of them. If you look at a cherry flower, here it is, 5 parts, 5 merisses, we call it. And what we have there is a flower that has 5 petals. And that's what you typically expect when you're looking at these, a 5 petal flower. But if you ever look at these, look at this. It's called double flowering or doubled flower, as it's sometimes called. Now this is going up to 25 or 26 petals versus the normal 5. We love these plants. It's a mutation. But where did the heck did those petals come from? They had to come from something. And essentially, it's a mutation where one organ replaces the other. And this is of some concern to people. So take a look at our basic flower here with the sepals, the petals, and that huge array of stamens and a pistil. Now, there can be flowers with more than one pistil. But when we go double flower, guess what? We may have modified the stamens and pistil, one or the other or both, into actually serving as petals. So a good rule of thumb is if you're looking at a double flower cultivar, it may be, notice I said may be sterile. I always tell my students that if you're going to spec out a plant and it's double flower and a customer asks you, well, what's the fruit look like? Well, you may just want to take a hesitation because if you don't know, look it up. Some just are completely sterile. Why? Because you've replaced all the parts, right, as a petal. Look at this. This is sweet mock orange, 4 petals. That's what the normal has. Look at this. The stamens have been mutated to become petals. Now, you might think, well, that's kind of pretty. Not if you're a bee. And there's actually people looking at this and saying, wait a minute, we're getting a lot of plants out there that are confusing the bees. Now, keep in mind, this is still the minority. It's not like our entire landscape has been covered with these sort of plants. But nevertheless, when you're taking a look at what to plant, maybe one of the things you want to be aware of is, if I'm doing a pollinator garden, first of all, double flowering is not a good plan. And if you're having your landscape with too many of these, you're just going to frustrate the little bees there. We also have, and this is an example of it, this is a normal crabapple, but we have them that are double flowers that lack stamens and pistils. Prairie rose crabapple, it can't produce fruit. Okay, it doesn't have any reproductive parts anymore, but boy, does it have pretty flowers. Uh, but not always. Here's an English hawthorn. This is a variety, and it is double flower, but you'll notice that you still have the stamens in there. What they found is that plants that are double flowers but still have some portion of a functional pistil or stamens may be pollinated, but it's often frustrating to the pollinators because they're having to search longer and farther and explore the flowers deeper in order to collect the pollen. So it's more work for them. But that's why we do have some double flower plants that still produce fruit, such as this one. Now, what about fruit trees? We do have some, such as apples and pears, that are self-sterile. Okay. Self-sterile means if I go out and plant a apple cultivar, I'm not going to get any fruit. Even though they have flowers that contain stamens and pistils, they will not pollinate themselves. They have a mechanism to prevent that. And then apricots, peaches, sour cherries, many of these prunus, minus the sweet cherries. For them, they're self-fruitful. You have a peach by itself, it's just fine. It'll produce fruit without any problem. So are apricots, one tree, you'll get fruit. Peaches, one tree, you'll get fruit, but not apples. You get an apple out by itself, it's just a pretty lonely apple. It's not going to be able to produce fruit. It cannot pollinate itself. And it's under genetic control because it makes sense. Don't pollinate yourself. We want to make sure we maintain genetic diversity. Now, this gets confused a lot. And I love Linda's comment this morning about AI. And that was a hilarious example she used. But even the internet in itself is a problem. I like this one. Now, almost all apple trees are dioecious. Dioecious? No, there are not. And you will have people come into your garden centers and ask us, well, I need two apple trees for fruit. Good. Yep. So where are the guy apple trees? There aren't any. All have flowers with stamens and pistils. And so the problem is if you plant one, it does not have a pollinator. So if they're all of one cultivar, no fruit will be developed. Well, we have flowers that are not complete in the sense of having stamens and pistils. We have flowers with no functional pistils, only stamens. We call those unisexual. And this is a staminate flower. You'll notice the pistil is missing. And then we also have plants that have a pistil but no functional stamens. Again, a unisexual flower, but this is a pistillate flower. So some plants do have flowers that only have stamens and only have pistils. And by that, some tree species. And here's some good examples. These are trees that we refer to as monoecious. They have staminate flowers and they have pistillate flowers, but they're on the same tree. So if you go up and look at a individual flower, it's either going to be staminate or pistillate, but you'll find both on the same plant. And if you look at this list here, you'll notice these are wind pollinated trees. But again, they're going to produce the staminate and pistillate on the same plant. So oaks, for example, have this. If you take a look at them, you're going to find some of the flowers are staminate and some are pistillate, but they'll be on the same plant. Alders, same thing. You'll find flowers that are the staminate flowers, and you'll find some that are the pistillate flowers, but they're still on the same tree, just separate flowers. If you look at these trees, though, one interesting thing is they tend to have the pistillate flowers in the upper canopies and the staminate flowers in the lower part of the canopy. You might say, why would you do that? Well, it keeps you from pollinating yourself. Okay, the idea being that the pollen that's being released by the staminate flowers is going to be picked up by air currents and drifted up to the tree standing next to it or downwind from it. The pollen isn't going to rise straight up and pollinate itself. Frankly, they can pollinate themselves if forced, but this is kind of a unique way of keeping that separation out there. And it occurs with conifers. You ever go up to spruce, pine, or that, the lower branches is where you're going to get all that dust coming from because that's where you're going to find the male cones, as we call them. And if you shake those, you'll get the pollen. Where the female cones, the cones we typically look at, are going to be towards the top of the tree because that's where it keeps them from pollinating themselves. Well, then we also have plants out there that have what most people think. There's a tree out there that is a guy tree and a tree out there that's a gal tree for every species. And no, this is actually relatively rare. But dioecious, where you have staminate and pistillate flowers, but on different trees. So a tree only produces staminate flowers, or a tree only produces pistillate flowers. Now, as you might expect, Trees that can do this are trees we tend to try to release as fruitless trees. Because if I'm only planting trees that are staminate, well, that means I'm not going to get fruit. And if you look at this list, box elders, ash, ginkgo, coffee trees, junipers, Osage oranges. I mean, I looked at lists for Albuquerque, and for example, Osage orange, you had listed down there one of the male cultivars that was out there, so you would not get the fruit. And on these, yes, one tree will be all staminate, one tree will be all pistillate. And Osage orange is, like I say, a perfect example of that. You get this huge fruit that there's nothing that really wants to eat it. It's been around a long time. I mean, we sell them in the fall here in South Dakota. You'll find these called hedge balls. Helps keep spiders, mice, and bugs out of the house. You know what? They're sold as spider killers, and you know what? They work. You hit a spider with one of those things, you'll flat out kill it, but they're not going to scare off a spider. And we also then can get incredibly complicated that we have plants out there that produce co-sexual flowers. In other words, they have stamens and pistils and pistillate flowers, or co-sexual flowers and just staminate flowers. So there's all these differences among the species. Flowering ash, a true ash tree, this is found in Europe. It produces either flowers that are have stamens and pistils, or it produces flowers with stamens. And chestnut, almost the reverse in this sense, co-sexual flowers or flowers that are pistillate. And then you get some like this. Nobody's coming up with a golden rain tree that is seedless, though that might be kind of nice, though we kind of like the appearance of them, but these do become invasive because guess what? This will produce co-sexual flowers, staminate flowers, and pistillate flowers on the same tree. So it's really hedged its bets. And then we get honey locust, for example. Same thing, co-sexual, but either staminate or pistillate flowers. And so as you can see here, it is kind of complicated to come up with a cultivar that is only going to produce staminate flowers. And because of this, even our seedless honey locusts expect them to produce some fruit. That's what I tell the customer. You're buying one that is podless. Generally speaking, that will be true, but it's still going to produce some flowers that do that. And then you get some that they're going to do it all the time. You can see this kind of disaster here. Now, if you ever look at a honey locust, I mean, one in the woods, you're going to find a lot of thorns. And I mean a lot of thorns. Look at that tree. I took that picture in Missouri. Huge thorns. And if you ever wondered, why would you produce thorns like that? Because those pods we don't like, they're sweet. They can have a 36% sugar content. Back during the Second World War, you'll find extension bulletins on feeding these to cattle. And guess what? You can make beer out of these things. So think about that next time you go out and rake these darn things up. But the sweetest pods are on the trees with the most thorns. There's a good reason for that. These trees have been around a long time and nothing really likes to eat the pods now. But back 10,000 years ago, you bet, mastodons were out. And mastodons like to reach up and get the pods. And so you think, oh, the thorns were to keep other animals from crawling up. No, you know what the thorns were for? To keep the mastodons from pushing over the trees to collect this. Now, we haven't had mastodons for 10,000 years, but the trees will still produce thorns unless we have a thornless cultivar. And a lot of the thornless cultivars, their pods are not sweet at all. It makes sense. Nothing wanted to eat them. So what about the fruit? And that gets to the heart of this. We don't want seedless trees. We want fruitless trees. These aren't like grapefruits where you say, well, I still want the honey locust pod. I just don't want the seeds in it. No, we don't want fruit. So a better description would be fruitless trees rather than seedless trees. who cares if the beans are missing out of it? Now, in some cases, we want trees without fruit or seed. Common buckthorn's a good example of that. We don't want to see the fruit. It is a very powerful laxative. Eating about 4 or 5 berries, you're going to make being a run for the restroom. We've unfortunately had students think they're little cherries and pick them off in the fall. And of course, the seed, which passes through the systems of birds, uh, plant them everywhere, and it's rather invasive. And then the seeds are a problem on buckeye trees. The flowers are attractive, but nobody wants the seed in those things once you break them open. I get people calling me every year because, well, you know what? These are chestnuts. I want to roast them and eat them. I said, they're not chestnuts. Well, I see the squirrels eating them. You're not a squirrel. Don't take your dietary habits from small rodents. Leave them on the ground. And there are seeds that are absolutely toxic. Interesting enough with yews, not a common plant down there, but nevertheless an interesting one. The actual fleshy covering is not toxic, but the seed itself is very toxic. So we do have trees we don't want the seed. And juniper, same thing, mainly because in a lot of areas the plants have become invasive. So we plant a lot of seedless trees, but why do they end up with fruit? Okay. And here's the reasons. This is what we're going to cover. If you go out there and you said, I bought a tree that does not have fruit, it is a cultivar that is, quote, seedless, meaning no fruit, yet it has fruit. These are the reasons. First one's easy. Was the tree properly tagged? You know the general rule, don't ever buy a tree that doesn't have a label still attached to it. How do you know that someone might have messed up with the label and you actually bought one that is not the cultivar you intended? But the other is there's trees out there that are sold as fruitless trees, and they truly are as long as you only plant them and no other cultivar. This is one of the quote fruitless pears. We planted it on campus. In fact, we planted two right next to each other. And yeah, we never saw fruit until one year, 350 feet away, we planted another pear. And guess what? We got fruit like crazy. It was all over the place. It's horrible fruit. The squirrels won't eat it. The bunnies won't eat it. They'll throw it back to you. Nobody wants to eat it. I got a student to take a bite out of one of these for a couple of bonus points, and that's about it. In fact, facilities had to go through and rake up the fruit twice a week. Now, the fruit is so bad, you don't get it rotting and yellow jackets going after it even. But it was originally marketed as a fruitless pear. And it is a fruitless pear as long as you don't plant any other pears around it. And that was our problem with the original pears, these Bradford pears, all these calorie pears. In fact, they were originally marketed as sterile trees. You will not get fruit. The reason for that, they were cultivars. And if you plant 20 of them next to each other, you're right, you'll never get fruit. They're all genetically the same trees. Well, the problem happened is people started planting a couple of different ones out there. And then what happened? You started getting fruit. And these plants became incredibly invasive. They're on the naughty list in many areas of the north, which I find fascinating that it was as recently as what 2005 they were actually the tree of the year from some urban forestry group. Not anymore. They come up all the places you don't want them to show up. And it all got to this because they're not compatible with themselves. If you go out there and plant just one calorie pear, you won't get any fruit. Okay. Why? Because they cannot pollinate themselves. And remember, you can plant 5 or 6 of them, but they're all clonally the same. But you still may see fruit. Well, wait a minute. How'd that happen? Well, that gets back to how pollination occurs. We used to think that a bee would go from one tree to the next. Hey, okay, I'm on this prairie spy and I'm going to fly over the Sweet 16. Bees don't do that. Bees go back to the same tree they've been working. The pollination occurs back at the hive where they rub on each other. Bees are like cats. They like to rub. And so that's why you can say, well, I've got an apple tree or a pear tree and I still get fruit and there's no other apple or pear around me. That's right. But the bees are sharing the same hive. So when you get this 500 feet is a recommended distance, 5,000 feet is far better. I'm serious. If you think, well, if I plant these so there's no other pears within 500 feet, expect to see fruit. Well, what's the next reason? You might have a tree by itself that is, quote, fruitless, but producing fruit. Why? Because of the rootstock. Remember, almost all our trees are grafted, and that graft is coming from another tree. It happens a lot with apple trees, for example. The top is one cultivar, the base is another. And in fact, when we look at apple trees like that, we know what the rootstocks are as much as the top. And we put them on different rootstocks to achieve different heights. Well, we graft just about everything out there, but we don't pay attention to what we graft it to. Now, we do have trees that are on their own roots. You buy anything on that list, and I know this list is more north than south, obviously, but all this is on their own roots grown from cuttings or tissue culture. So it's the same tree from the bottom of the root system to the top of the canopy. Autumn blazed maple, for example, not one of my favorites, but nevertheless, it's all on its own roots. But almost everything else we have is grafted. And take a look at this, how this graft changed. Look at that. You can see the top grew faster than the bottom. And this on campus. Here we have a thornless cockspur hawthorn. Most of it, at least. If you look at the base, wait a minute, that's a different hawthorn. And sure enough, it's grafted on the common hawthorn. So you can see what I'm going to is that if the suckers come up into the tree, those suckers are from a different tree, and the flowers on that could end up pollinating the cultivar, the fruitless cultivar you planted. So another good reason to remove any sprouts coming up around the base. And if here's the very brief list of an incredibly long list of all the budded trees that are out there for sale. I mean, straight street maples, then hawthorns and ash and ginkgos and all the way through all these different trees that you got to be very cautious what's the bottom as well as the top. Even oaks, they'll put those on a lot of different rootstocks. Now, this can be a problem in itself. For us, for example, I'll give you a northern example. We do like State Street maple. It is a tree for a cool climate, and that looks like a little Norway maple, and it has a good fall color to it, and not much attacks it. But the sprouts at the base, those are actually from a hedge maple. And hedge maple's not hardy to South Dakota. So we end up with winter kill on these trees during open winters because the root system dies. Or these monstrosities, these Tinkerbell lilacs. The top is really one of the shrub lilacs, and they grafted at about 4 feet on a tree lilac stem. And if you're not removing the sprouts coming up along the stem, you'll end up with something like this. The tree lilac going up through the cultivar you actually purchased. And just a point, any of the hybrid elms, you ever look around the base for them? All it is a Siberian elm rootstock. So we ought to pay more attention to the rootstocks we put things on, and definitely make sure you're not getting one that could actually pollinate the fruitless plant you have. And this even occurs to pines. The Tannenbaum pine is actually grafted on Scots pine. So it's a very complicated process. Well, here's the big one, rootstock escape. So I already told you these things are on a rootstock. Coffee tree. I love coffee trees. Looked at some nice ones in Albuquerque too. See, it's on your list. Not a major tree, but it's on your list. Well, we like the tree, and the pods are pretty poor. Nobody wants the pods. Guess what? These used to be eaten by woolly rhinoceroses. They've died maybe because of the flavor. But you can't do much with these. Yeah, you can roast a coffee out of them, I guess. It doesn't taste that good. They are listed as poisonous, but Linda's remark this morning was perfect. Trying to find the original source that says it's poisonous. I went all the way back and it wrote, well, we think someone in the next county might have gotten sick. Yeah, they do have some toxins in them. I wouldn't necessarily eat them. You do roast them, but the poison has not been confirmed as much as people think it has. And they are dioecious. There's coffee trees that have pistillate flowers and coffee trees that staminate flowers. So, this makes it easy. If we just plant trees that are staminate, we'll not see fruit. And that's absolutely true. You will not get these pods with the big beans in them. The Chinese have the same tree, but they make soap out of theirs, so I'll give them credit for that one. But look at this tree, and it's no reflection on a nursery or this particular tree, espresso. There's one planted on campus. It was labeled as espresso. Do you notice something about it? It's covered in pods. So we got wondering, why are we getting trees with pods on them? Because it's listed as, quote, a seedless tree. And it truly is, and it's a wonderful tree, but I want you to look at the base of your trees. Can you see that little crook there at the base? That's where the tree was budded. That's where it was grafted. The rootstock for coffee trees are just seed growing trees. And remember, the tree is dioecious. Some of those seed growing trees are going to be staminate. Some of those seed growing trees are going to be pistillate. But you're grafting a staminate tree onto them. And if you can't see that crook, what's happened is a rootstock escape. In other words, the bud didn't take when it was grafted, and it just sprouted up from the rootstock. So whatever the rootstock was is what you get. And we started looking at this around there and found that a lot of the small trees that were producing fruit, you couldn't see the graft anymore. And it wasn't because the trees were that big, it's the graft failed. And again, the term has been coined rootstock escape. So, one of the more important things you need to do to avoid these things is take a look at the base of any of these trees you're buying. You ought to see that small crook. Well, the other issue is, remember, the rootstock could be staminate or pistillate, and coffee tree likes to sucker. Here was a tree, it was the parent tree was staminate, the rootstock was pistillate, so all the sprouts that came up around it were pistillate trees. So we have the one tree in the center does not produce any pods whatsoever. All the trees surrounding it produce pods like crazy. So again, it'd be nice if we actually grafted them on a staminate tree. And that's a problem with cork trees too. Not a big one down there, but nevertheless a tree that has very thick bark, hard to graft. And we'll see this one too pop up where, again, it's not supposed to produce fruit. In fact, we have cultivars, Eye Stopper, His Majesty, that do not produce the fruit, which is becoming quite invasive. And nobody wants it. Smells like turpentine. But we can have rootstock escapes. And it's so important to look at the base of those young trees you're purchasing to make sure you actually bought the cultivar you intended, not that it died during propagation and that the rootstock literally sprouted up in its place. So any tree you're buying that is a named cultivar that is not on its own roots, take a look at that young tree when it comes in. You ought to see that crook. All right. Well, what else occurs out there? We hit the big one, but there's two more. This is an English oak, huge English oak, Scotland. 5,000 years old, they think. It's never produced seed, at least from the 1700s. And guess what? It started producing seed just on one branch. And it was a sport, a mutation. Honestly, that's where some of our old fruit trees actually came from. One branch just developed different characteristics than the rest of the tree. And we made that into a new apple cultivar, for example. But you can get this 2015, think of that. 2015, one small branch started producing it. That's going to be a very rare occurrence, but it does. But the last one I'm going to cover is the most frustrating. Trees can switch sex. Think about that for a minute. You're a tree that's dioecious. You are either producing only staminate flowers or pistillate flowers. Makes life easy. But one day you decide to switch. And that has happened. There's a great example that's written up in the book, The Ginkgo, the tree that time forgot. And it was on a 275-year-old ginkgo that suddenly started producing fruit that nobody wants. That's why you only buy male cultivars, quote, male cultivars of ginkgo trees. But here this tree was starting to produce fruit. And it wasn't because it was one sport, one branch that started doing it. Large portion of the tree started to do it. And it was just spontaneous. And ginkgos have done this and then switched back. Maple trees switch as they're older. They sometimes just start out only producing the staminate flowers and then producing staminate and pistillate, and then go back. It is kind of interesting that only one part of their life may they be staminate or pistillate or both. We try to put them in these nice, neat boxes, and it doesn't work that well. So ginkgos, yeah, is it a common occurrence? No. I still keep planting them. But you just got to be aware that every now and then you're going to have one along your street say, you know what? I think I'm going to produce fruit. And they will. I mean, the fruit is not that great. Called a silver apricot in China. You can make a soup out of it. It's an acquired taste, believe me. But that fruit, and here's some fruit I was picking this fall, and the fruit does smell. It smells really bad. And that's why we don't like to plant them and picking the stuff up. It's kind of like, well, I've mucked out barns, so it doesn't bother me. But it does have a little bit of odor to it, and that's why people are really not supposed to plant them, and it's not their fault. But the other thing that can happen is you can get sprouts coming up from the rootstock again. You still can get rootstock escape. So if you have a ginkgo that for the first 10 years didn't do anything because it doesn't really produce anything at that point, and then starts producing fruit, well, it's probably only producing pistillate flowers. We call them flowers, despite the fact it's a gymnosperm. And there's some other angiosperm, or some pistillate, staminate ones nearby. They have to be pretty close too, by the way. But you can also have it where you get two stems coming up, and guess what? The rootstock is staminate. All right. The other part is pistillate, and the same tree, essentially the same tree's pollinating itself. So once again, get rid of suckers. Always check the base of the trees to make sure that you're not getting a rootstock escape, because that's probably more common. However, let's get back to spontaneous switching sex, and that's junipers. In South Dakota, we have the issue nobody wants the female juniper trees because they don't want the fruit, which grows everywhere, and so it's taking over some rangelands and that they're not managing by fire and such. And it can become a real problem. In some other areas, you don't want to plant the staminate ones because the pollen, the cedar fever. Well, the problem we have with both is, guess what? Sexual expression can be rather flexible with some juniper species. So you might say, well, we're only going to plant staminate ones. What the heck? We're getting some that are producing the female cones. You might say, well, we're only going to plant the ones that produce the quote cones, and you can't plant the staminate ones because we don't want the pollen. And what the heck? Some of them change. Remember, the basic urge of nature is to reproduce, and it's hard for us to clone our urban landscape. So we're going to neatly put all our plants into one box or another. The box typically being we do not want to see fruit. In some cases, we don't want to see um, pollen. Well, I'm at approaching the end of my time, and I always know it's a struggle watching someone on a screen rather than being able to walk back and forth so I can see how you're reacting to the presentation and modify my cadence in that. So we did cover these 5 places here. I believe they're taping this too, so you can go back and review it if it went too fast. But these are the most common reasons that when you buy something, if it suddenly starts producing fruit, are the reasons that that seedless plant you bought is now fruit producing. Well, I'm right up against the window now here, people. And so I thank you for this opportunity. I have how I can be reached, john.ball at sdstate.edu, and my cell number, of course, which is the easiest way to reach me. I respond to text messages like most people do as well. I also have an article on this in Arborist News. And if you say, hey, could I get a copy of that? I'd be more than happy, as all authors are, to send you a PDF of the article on this topic from, I think it was 2 years ago in Arborist News. Well, I don't want to cut into your break at all, or your opportunity to chat with your exhibitors, but I will check to see if any questions were in the chat. And I do promise I will leave time at the end of my next one to answer any questions regarding safety or regarding this presentation on sex and the street tree. And for all those that have watched my safety talk, since this is being done remotely and people are watching it at home, it is not going to be a gore fest. It'll be a great talk, but don't worry, kids can be in the room while you're watching this. You're not going to see people going through a jibber. You all know what that looks like. I don't need to repeat it. So thank you for watching this and being with me. And I look forward to your return in 30 minutes after your break. Thank you.